Next up, let's talk about the strict option, which defaults to true these days. That used to not be the case, but now it's true by default. And as you can see here, this might be a bit small to read. It says enable all strict type checking options. So this one property here, setting that to true, is going to enable a whole bunch of type checks, additional rules or constraints for TypeScript. So these include things like no implicit any, strict null checks, and a bunch more. You can see a list of them on the docs here. And again, it just makes your type checks stricter, but the idea is you jump through some extra hurdles, you get some stronger guarantees of program correctness. It's all, I mean, TypeScript is about jumping through extra hurdles anyway. That's the point. Why not utilize all the hurdles we can to ensure the strongest end result? We're not writing TypeScript because it's, the most concise syntax in the world. We're writing it because we care about type checking. So we can use this one strict to true to turn all of them on. And we've been using this already. So we've come up against some of these errors or some of these messages. But if I turn this off, I'll just comment it out, or let's set it to false. And let's go to one of our files. It doesn't really matter which one. And let's write, I guess I'll do it in index. Let's write a function called do thing, and it accepts a thing, and then it console.logs a thing. All right, very boring. Well, you'll see that I'm not getting any errors. If I compile this code, it's totally fine. I get a little white ... under thing, and it says, it's sort of like a warning or a hint saying parameter thing implicitly has an any type, but a better type may be inferred from usage. But this is just a hint. This is not a full-blown error, right? I don't see it at all when I compile my code down here. So thing has no type. We're just, it could be anything, right? Right now, it literally is of any type. But if I come back in here and I say no implicit any is true, which is we've been working with, if strict is set to true, this is going to be true. But just to single it out, I turn it back on, and I'll come back to my file. Now I'm getting a red squiggly, a true error saying you can't do that. Parameter thing implicitly has an any type. So it's not a little hint anymore. It's not saying, oh, you might want to change that. It's saying this is wrong. You need to give it a type. And if I compile, I get an error, right? Found one error. Parameter thing implicitly has an any type. So that is no implicit any. I'm not going to go through all of these. We would be here forever. And some of these are quite niche checks, but no implicit any is a very important one to know about, as is strict null checks. So I'm going to just turn these off again. But strict null checks, if we just read about it here, strict null checks governs how TypeScript thinks about or what it allows you to do with null, false, and undefined. So if I have it false, set to false, which right now it is because I set all of these strict checks to false, I can do things like let users, which is an array of strings, if I can type, set that equal to an array that has, whoever, that's a user and that's a user. But then I can also come down and say, actually, users is equal to null, and even users is equal to undefined if I want to. And that's because strict null checks is off, and TypeScript allows us to do that. Whereas if I turn this back on, strict null checks to true, I'm going to get a little message, a nice error that says type null is not assignable. Type undefined is not assignable. So if I have strict null checks off, then I can do things like this. I can make things null that I might not want to be null. And that's exactly why we generally want it to be on. It says when strict null checks is true, null and undefined have their own distinct types, and you'll get an error if you try to use them where a concrete value is expected. So we've seen that before, right? We've talked about null and undefined as their own types. If you need something to potentially be null, you want it to be null, you can have strict null checks on, and then we can say the type of this is string, array, or null. And then we could add undefined if we really wanted to, but let's just say I want it to either be null or an array of strings. Now I'm clear. So I still have my strict null checks on, but it just forces me to be more explicit and say this thing can also be null. Okay, so that's strict null checks, and I think those are the only two I really want to call out right now and demonstrate, but there are all these other options, if I go back to strict, that we get for free by turning on strict, or by setting strict to true. So I'm just going to let that go back to its default value. I just want you to know how that works. And if you encounter a code base that, is behaving differently, or it allows you to have an implicit any, or it allows you to, make something null that you weren't expecting, it's because strict is probably set to false, or those specific options are set to false.